Can a bad review constitute defamation? And what exactly is defamation? Today on the podcast.
This is the Wedding Industry Law Podcast, a podcast dedicated to wedding professionals that are just trying to keep it legal. And now, your host, Rob Shank.
All right, welcome back to the podcast. We're going to have a super quick episode this week talking about defamation, bad reviews, and whether or not you as a wedding professional can sue somebody if you have been disparaged or defamed on the internets. Before I get into that, really quick call to action. If you are enjoying the content of these episodes, please like and subscribe. Please go onto YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would super appreciate that. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. I think I might have 170 change at this point. I really need you to subscribe. Even if you don't watch it ever again, hey man, I can live with that, but definitely need the subscriptions. Okay, with that said, let's move on. Now, all the time people wonder, why is somebody's situation different than mine? Why did somebody get to sue somebody for defamation and when? Meanwhile, I'm over here trying to get good reviews to overcome this bad review. What's the difference? Okay. Defamation is a legal cause of action, meaning if someone commits defamation, it allows the aggrieved party to sue for monetary compensation, to sue for money. It's a cause of action. It is a basis for a lawsuit, defamation. In order to prevail in a defamation case, you have to have evidence, and depending on what jurisdiction it is, it's going to depend on, there's going to be a certain level of evidence that you got to get to. But you have to show that the defendant in this case has made a false statement that has lowered your reputation in your community. That's what defamation is. It is a false statement that tends to lower your reputation in your community. Now, let's kind of parse through that. As you can probably figure, one person's truth versus falsity is different than the next person's truth or falsity. Whether or not something's true, I guess, according to Obi-Wan Kenobi, is depends on your point of view, right? Which always was kind of strange to me growing up watching that. Shouldn't truth be objective? But anyway, yes, that is a very difficult attribute to defamation law. The statement must be false. So typically, the quote-unquote easier claims are defamation claims involving statements that can be proven false or true easily. So, for example, I saw wedding videographer poop in the punch bowl during the wedding reception. Okay, that's either true or false. That happened or it did not happen. Okay, and you can get eyewitness testimony. You can get closed circuit television that's on the punch bowl all night, but that is something that either occurred or it did not occur. Okay, so that's the first circumstance that we're talking about. Like, what is objectively true or false? Then it gets into gray areas, right? Like, okay, the videographer was a jerk to me. Okay, well, what does that mean? Is that something that's absolute on that line, like the previous example of pooping in the punch bowl? Not as much. So in other words, verifiably untrue. It happened or not. Okay, then you get into, unfortunately, the gray area of hyperbole, of opinion of people trying to be funny, right? So you might say something along the lines, or see something along the lines of the wedding videography crew were walking zombies. The wedding videography crew were walking zombies. They were not quick to, react to my suggestions and comments. Like, what are they? Literally zombies? Are they literally undead? No. So it's hard to parse sometimes whether or not something's defamation, because it sits in this land of hyperbole. It sits in this land of exaggeration. Okay. And that's why these cases can be extremely difficult sometimes, because you can see something described as, well, these guys are basically walking zombies. Okay, well, then you got to parse through. They're not technically zombies. What are you trying to imply with this, and what can someone take in all seriousness from it? So if you said these guys are walking zombies, and the reason they're walking zombies is because they're all over the age of 65, and it doesn't seem like they have their full capacity, now you kind of put that hyperbole within a verifiable statement. Are they over 65? Do they have their full capacity? Okay. So it can be a difficult thing. That's not to say, though, that people can hide behind hyperbole, and people can hide behind humor or hide behind exaggeration. So, for example, you can't say, in my opinion, wedding videographer is a crook and stole my money. Okay, you can't hide behind the First Amendment and do that. In some instances, it's how a reasonable listener would take that. Even though you said it's my opinion that this person is a crook, you are making the allegation that it is so. And if it is a verifiable thing that is false or verifiably false, and it lowers their reputation, then that's defamation. Short and simple. So false statement lowers reputation. So is a bad review defamation? Possibly, if it's untrue and lowers your reputation. There's other elements to these claims, and one of them is going to be damages. Okay, how are you damaged in this by the online review or somebody's statement? Now, in many jurisdictions, some damages are presumed. So if somebody defames you, depending on the type of defamation, you are presumed hurt. And then you get to ask the jury for money to compensate you for those injuries, for being hurt in that way. But typically, in order to have a meritorious defamation claim, a lot of times, you're going to have to show a jury, you got to connect the dots. You're going to have to connect the dots between the defamatory statement and your damages, your losses. So some jurisdictions call special damages. So, for example, you can link a review or a series of reviews and show that your revenue declined starting at that moment. Okay, or you can show the court, I would get 2 phone calls, 2 leads a day, every day for 5 years, and then once that review went public, I got 1 lead, 1 phone call a week. Things like this, and then you necessarily link them to lost income or lost profits, and that's a component of the damages in the defamation. So a lot of times you have just damages that flow just automatically, and that's up to the jury, and then you have damages that you would need to link to the defamatory statement by actual concrete math, receipts, as the kids would say these days, linking the two. So I would say, like, breach of contract can be tough. Like, there are cases that are not as cut and dried as a breach of contract case. They're not the same. Defamation is an intentional tort. Breach of contract is breach of contract. So they're typically not the same, right? So you bring a defamation case against the person. Let me back up. You can either bring a defamation case against the person that started it. You started it, the person that uttered the statement or wrote the review. Okay. Typically, you can, in the law, you can typically go after everybody else that also said it. Okay. If you defame somebody by telling somebody something, and then that person tells somebody, you can all be defendants. You can all be named defendants in that defamation suit, because you simply for the fact that you're not the originator of the false statement does not provide you protection. If you utter a defamatory statement, even if you're just repeating what somebody said or republishing what somebody else printed, you can also be liable for defamation. Now, the reason why I say that is because there are exceptions to this theory. The main one is that there are federal statutes and probably state statutes, I don't know, but the one I'm thinking of is federal, meaning it applies to everybody, that certain websites are immune from defamation claims. So Yelp, Google, The Knot, Wedding Wire, I don't know if that anymore. These online forums that are in part there for reviews cannot be sued for defamation by actually being the host of the actual defamatory statement. In other words, if someone goes to your Knot page or someone goes to your Google business page and writes a review that is defamatory in nature, they are the defendants. You would not be able to bring in Google or Yelp or the Knot as defendants. That is an exception to the general rule that if you publish a defamatory statement, which they're actually doing, you're liable. In this instance, our Congress has carved out an exception for the republishers in this particular instance. So whether or not pursuing a defamation claim against a client is a good idea will depend on a variety of circumstances. In my opinion, you probably shouldn't do it unless your career has been ended because of it. So, and the reason I'm saying that is because you, in a defamation case, are going to run into the same collection issues that you would in a breach of contract case. So, meaning that even if you win, let's say you get $1 million verdict, you still have to collect. So, unless there is an insurance policy that will cover that verdict, then you're chasing money. And that is typically a no-win or a no bueno situation. So many times, not every time, but many times, defamation claims might be throwing good money after bad. So I actually wanted to have this podcast this week, talking about defamation, just the basics of what defamation is. Because, it's a pretty simple concept, but parsing it out can be difficult for courts. But it's a simple concept. I wanted to get this out of the way because next week we are going to have Dave Wishnu. Dave Wishnu is the attorney that represented a Texas wedding photographer in a defamation claim against clients that defamed her multiple times, resulting in a $1 million verdict for the wedding photographer. Again, Dave Wishnu, the attorney, will be on next week. We're actually going to talk about that case. It's going to be exciting. So really, if you're into that kind of thing, stick around and listen next week. But I wanted to be able to have this episode as kind of like a primer for next week. So that way we can, kind of dispense with some of the issues with defamation, get right into the meat of his particular case. If you are enjoying the content of these episodes, then please, by all means, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. If you have a question and you would like for me to address it on air, please let me know. Leave a comment. That would be fantastic. And that's it. So we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Wedding Industry Law Podcast. This podcast is intended for general information only. Nothing in this podcast is intended to be legal advice. Do not rely on this podcast for your legal matter. Instead, consult an attorney in your area. Thanks, obrigada, até semana que vem.